Meanwhile, a fire has been started on the fuel barge. It all seems like a lot of trouble. So why do it?
Well, it's the most practical way in which we can bring every organisation which is involved with this sort of incident into play and to test out the communications and operational procedures which are resulting from it. We have the fire brigade, the police, the hospital services.
And, of course, observers from all the organisations involved, both from the management side and from the trade unions. Just before 0 hour, the Casualties Union volunteers are put aboard the stricken vessels from a police launch.
Hello, can I speak to Dr. Martin, please? It's urgent. There's a major accident on its way.
The rescue operation starts with a phone call to each emergency service, in this case the designated hospital, St Stephen's, Fulham.
10:35.
At the incident, the rescue operation is underway. The river police have already arrived and are standing by to pick up any casualties who've fallen into the water. Because of the extreme cold and the very real risk of drowning, wooden dummies rather than human volunteers are used for the purpose. Casualties who are not trapped are taken off onto a launch. One advantage of using Casualties Union personnel is that they're trained to simulate the symptoms of their injuries. They therefore help to slow down the rescue operation to a realistic pace. Then, just as in real life, something unexpected happened. One of the observer launches lost power and drifted down helplessly onto the scene of the incident. Observers were not solely positioned around the actual incident itself. They were also stationed, for example, on Wandsworth Bridge, which was the control point chosen for the exercise. It was from here that Polacap, the Port Authority official in overall control, operated. And it was here that the mobile control vans of the main emergency services were parked. And it was here that the fire brigade planned the deployment of its resources. For example, the teams spraying foam onto the spilt fuel. These teams worked both from the shore and from boats which had been adapted for this purpose. One of the observers on the bridge was a senior officer of the London Fire Brigade, Mr. Charles Clisby.
Well, it's a good simulation. In fact, what we've done, we've got a lot of firemen who are normally shore-based, aboard boats and out into the river. This is a bread and butter type exercise, but the real thing we're getting out of it, of course, is problems in communications, and more important, I'm not entirely sure we could maintain the foam supply from land. And therefore I'm going to press the chief officer for a boat to be converted into a foam boat to deal with this kind of incident. In theory, there is petrol spilt on the river in large amounts, and it's travelling with the tide. I wonder sometimes how, in stretches of the river where there were no bridges, we might deal. We do need a fireboat.
All this activity was coordinated from a mobile control unit.
Well, the mobile control unit is fulfilling its normal function at any type of incident. It's coordinating communication between about 10 different points. On the river, on this bridge, at Cadogan Pier, on the boats, on land, police taking firemen in their boats to the incident, etc., etc. In other words, it's maintaining an enormous communication network.
I just want the officers in charge of the machines and the numbers on the crew. And the number of life jackets that are available.
Officers in charge of the crew, of the machines, and the number of the crew.
And the number of life jackets available at the festival pier at this time.
Will you call up Lady Irene, ask them if they've got cutting plant on board?
Yes, sir.
Cold cutting. I don't want settling. Plus 10 bodies waiting to be removed at Cadogan Pier. Okay, so the 40 mark. Okay. I'm not sure at this stage whether the passenger vessels cleared enough.
What are you on there, Barry?
For the Kilo 10, about the names of officer in charge machines, number of men aboard and number of life jackets.
On channel 1?
Yeah.
So, I know you've got your work planned.
I want to know get hold of the fire switch and order it to the passenger launch. Make contact with existing division web.
Just now, I asked Polar Chief, who is Commander Satow, you see him down there from Port London Authority, to pretend that his radio system had failed and whether he would walk into the control unit and say, put me in touch at once with Galleon's Reach. This will set them a problem for a second. If they think properly, they can do it on Channel 5, where one of our girls from one of our controls is sitting in Galleon's Reach in the PLA control and will suddenly find she's the centre of river communications of PLA.
There were other communication problems too. Some radio interference resulted from the proximity of the control vans to one another, and the fire brigade found that their walkie-talkie sets were hampered by the metal framework of the bridge. All the casualties from the incident were taken by various craft almost 2 miles downriver to Cadogan Pier in Chelsea. It was here that the ambulance service waited to transport them to the designated hospital.
He's on a drip. If you can go forward, can you? Yeah. I think we'll manage, won't we?
Hold tight.
We'll manage to go. We'll take that in.
Get on the bank then.
Right, we'll let it go along a bit.
Okay.
We'll go straight up with this, straight up.
Sorry.
Straight up. Right. Turn round. Anyone coming in the back?
Anyone want to go?
You're going in front, are you?
Head of the accident unit at St Stephen's Hospital is Dr. Lawrence Martin.
There is this paradox that hospitals are supposed to be very good at major accident situations, where in fact they get only perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime crack at doing the real thing. And I think mock-ups of this sort are probably not very common, so that all told one gets very little real practice.
He has got a fractured ankle.
What I tried to do today, because this has been our first exercise, was to get people to use up real time, to examine their casualties, to put up mock drips, to go through the motions as though they were actually treating injuries. What we don't simulate is anything that would cause any discomfort to the people who play the parts of the casualties. We didn't, for instance, actually stick needles into their arms or give them injections or otherwise molest them. We didn't take actual x-rays because there's no justification in bombarding them with x-rays for no purpose, but we sent them round to x-ray departments and said, here are your first 6 casualties, now what are you going to do, how are you going to accommodate them? And we tried to get them in the x-ray department involved in the same way as we had been involved.
What are the disadvantages?
Well, the only disadvantage from our point of view is that it's disruptive of the normal activity of the department, but then I think the value of the exercise far outweighs the disruption and the inconvenience to the public who tend to be kept waiting. They would certainly benefit if we were, as a result, better at our job if and when a disaster situation does arise.
Do you have to disrupt the department?
Yes, you must seriously disrupt the department, and we endeavoured to do that this morning, and not just to do a paper exercise. You disrupt not only the department, but much of the rest of the hospital. You have to commandeer clinics for accommodation, you have to throw people out and say go and work elsewhere. You have to commandeer beds, and you have to commandeer people from almost every category of staff. So you seriously disrupt the rest of the hospital. And if you don't do this, in my view, then the exercise is not a real exercise. It doesn't test anything.
Okay, have you got any pain anywhere?
The hospital staff are required to carry out a full examination even when the casualty is not specially made up. In this case, the victim is a police cadet bearing a card which shows that he is a 44-year-old man with a broken ankle.
I'm just going to move your ankle up and down to see if it's painful.
Yes.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Is that so now?
Yes.
Okay, I think you've got a small fracture down there on the outside of the leg, so we'll get an x-ray and plaster it. Keep you in the ward for a bit.
Yes, can you come in here?
So you shouldn't have him on there at all, you see. The stretcher's wrong, the thing is unstable, and in reality that's dangerous. So you must be on a tilting trolley. All right? So get him transferred. You can get him to stand up. And you've got a chap with multiple injuries, serious injuries, who may have airway problems. He must therefore be on a tilt trolley. He'd also been placed on top of the trolley with the stretcher on top of the trolley, and this of course in reality is unstable and dangerous, so we've moved him for the purposes of the exercise as we would do it in reality onto a tilt trolley. He must be able to be tilted head downward.
Actually, when he came in, he's never had a card done anything.
Yeah, well, you see, this is another problem. The documentation with people spread out all over the place is terribly difficult. It's one of the most difficult things that has come out of this exercise. So what happens when you start to spread people out outside the normal confines of the department?
And what's actually going to happen to this patient now? What's going to be done to him?
Well, this patient has, for the purposes of the exercise, been seen by a doctor. He has been examined and x-rayed, a drip has been put up, and he is now about to be transferred to the ward.
As far as this exercise goes, what will happen to him now?
As far as the exercise is concerned, he will go to a ward. There have been beds prepared to receive casualties, and he really is at the end of his part now.
So he will, what, go home in about half?
He can be dismissed. The police will pick up the casualties and take them all home. He'll be divested of his makeup.
Okay.
But it's not over yet for all the casualties.
In that box, you've got a ring pad. We give it in where? In my bag. There's a ring pad over the bank. One of them. Put the bag down here. Yeah, try and come down here.
River transportation was problematic, especially in getting some of the firemen and their equipment to the incident.
That's the line, don't
Have you asked the oil You've made the arrangements?
Yes.
I see.
We've also made arrangements, sir, for cutting gear on board this boat. But we've just been told it's not there.
Well, it's not. For the purpose of the exercise, it's not there. We understand that fully, don't we?
Right.
Good.
Is the fire out officially, by the way? Is the fire out?
Fire at this stage?
Fire this out. Oh, that's good. You're just damping down now.
Yes, sir.
Port Health is just coming. The one is still trapped. There's no rush for a minute.
We're unable to get at him at present, so we just have to wait now until it's all sorted out.
If you can hang on until we can actually get this man.
Obviously they can reach the man, but for the purposes of the exercise, they're pretending he's trapped behind a steel bulkhead, which has to be cut away.
We've got 2 casualties.
Yeah, have your mates on that one.
Right. The shaft, he was confident of broken leg and injuries either side of his head.
We're waiting for cutting gear. When they cut it, you can get to it.
Got Ella. Have a go, guys.
With the freeing of this man, the exercise was virtually concluded. We asked Captain Cousins what were his first impressions.
Well, there's a number of factors that stand out, I think. One of the first things to happen was that bodies were thrown into the river, and the rescue services were there very, very quickly, perhaps almost too quickly. So this is one point that arises. The next thing I think to happen was the fire breaking out on board the vessel, and this cut off radio communications, which meant that immediately one of the Harbour Service launches had to take over radio communications between the scene of the casualty and Polacap. The next point perhaps to arise was the difficulty the fire brigade had in getting to 1 or 2 of the injured who were trapped on board the vessel, and this required cutting gear, and there was a question of the transport of the cutting gear to the scene of the incident, which might need looking at. Well, all the lessons that we've learnt today will be discussed at a post-exercise discussion we will hold very shortly, and we will have a post-mortem on the exercise, and each participating organisation will bring along their problems. They'll look at the logs they've kept of the running operations as they've gone along today, and obviously we're going to discuss this and learn a lot from it.
This incident was a specific type of disaster with its own distinctive problems, so you might well ask, can one draw any general lessons from it? In Dr. Martin's case,
I think in general terms, yes. We knew, or rather I knew, in advance that the situation that was being mocked up today, and I knew the sort of injuries that we would expect to get from such a disaster as this. There were going to be immersion victims, there were going to be burns, and there were going to be various other injuries, and there were going to be numbers of unconscious people. But in saying that, you've only really covered some of the categories that you could get from almost any disaster. And when you get to situations like bomb explosions, you've got every type of injury across the board. You can expect anything and everything, and that's what you get.
After last night's bomb in a Chelsea restaurant, a big search is now underway.
36 hours later, St Stephen's was the designated hospital for the victims of the bomb at Walton's restaurant.